I recently read this line that was describing a character who would perpetually clog the sink with tea bags. It's just one of those like character personal details that I love so much, because I also always clog the sink with tea bags. But you know, that's a bit of a weird thing to open with, but it's what came out of my mouth, so it's what happened. But today, in this video, I'm gonna tell you about all of the books that I read in June, because it is now July. I read 7 books in June and 1 short story that's part of a collection that I'm gonna yap at you about today, beginning with Dumb Luck. Oh yes, I will talk about this very briefly because I've talked about it in the last few videos. I read this in my traveling around in Vietnam vlog. I'm doing a series where I try and read a book that is written by an author from every country that I visit, ideally while I'm traveling in that country. Dumb Luck is about a sort of street urchin who essentially cons his way to the top tier of society, the upper crust, through a number of shenanigans and like just dirty deals and like really questionable behavior. It plays with the idea of fate, all set in 1920. Oh, I think so. I think it's set in like 1920, French colonial Vietnam. And it was perfect for reading while I was traveling because each chapter is like a short story involving this like cast of characters. I thought this was so great. It was a pretty easy read and hilarious, like laugh out loud funny, so funny, because it is a satire of the late colonial society and this like push for modernization. Because there's this one part that I particularly enjoy, one aspect of the story, where the main guy becomes a tailor in a shop and he begins suggesting different clothes, and all the clothes are sort of titled like Innocence for, you know, a young woman who wants to get married to, you know, XYZ person, or different underwear that has more risque kind of names that he goes about trying to sell to people. And yeah, it's a little raunchy. It's pretty great. That is Dumb Luck, and I will link the vlog where I give my full thoughts and share a little bit more about the trip down below. The next one I want to talk about is House of Blight. This is a newer romantasy. I thought it was actually a completed duology, but it came out very, very recently. Essentially, this is set in a different world. There is this blight that causes people to rot inside out. Our main girl, Adira, is a thread mender. That means that she is able to sort of like, it's healing magic. And the toll that her magic takes is usually that she suffers a little bit of like what the side effects of whatever she is healing, but also she loses a few threads of her life. So obviously if people knew that she had this special ability, she probably wouldn't live very long. She lives alone with her 2 brothers, and one day they get Blight and she gets pulled into the Fae realm. She agrees to go and work for them on the condition that they save her brothers from Blight. This book really brings back Fae guys with dermal piercings, which I am not opposed to, and there was something kind of nostalgic. The style of the book and like the atmosphere of the book reminded me a little bit of like Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Owen. But like I said before, I thought that there were certain areas that were a little underdeveloped. Like I really didn't know anything about this like Fae Prince person that she gets involved with, because he's not very forthcoming, and you don't get to see what she's super drawn to apart from like that of a carnal nature. He has no hobbies. And then there's kind of a love triangle, which I don't mind love triangles. I just didn't feel very invested in the romance side of this book at all. The Blight stuff was interesting. I will probably pick up book 2 just to kind of see where we're going with that and how that continues to develop. But things got wrapped up fairly okay in this book, and I think it just kind of left me feeling like that was fine. It was a fine way to pass the time. If you like Feyre in Tamlin's house vibes, like that first chunk of ACOTAR, and you just were like, I want to stay here forever, that is this book. After that, I picked up Moon of the Turning Leaves. This is a post-apocalyptic book written by a Canadian Indigenous author, and it's the second in a duology that are kind of each standalones. So the first book is Moon of the Crusted Snow. I loved it. I read it earlier this year. We are following the same characters and the same Indigenous community following the apocalypse, but it's like a time jump of 10 years or so. So without spoilers, roughly Moon of the Crusted Snow is when the apocalypse first happens, and sort of what happens to this Indigenous community that is in, I believe, Northern Ontario, like just how that affects their lives and eventually brings them back to a more traditional lifestyle and connecting with their heritage despite some of the difficulties and like terrible things that end up happening. So this is kind of a continuation of that story. Food is running out in the place that the community is currently set up in, and so it's sort of them traveling to scout out potentially returning to their traditional territory and all of the things that happen along the way. And we get to learn a little bit more about like what happened during this apocalypse, like what happened to the rest of the world. The world expands just a little bit. I always say that this is not a great series for people who want the apocalypse book and want to know what happened. This is much more about the quiet brutality of, humanity and nature and the wilderness and colonialism, and also the comfort of community. This book was a little bit slower than the first one, but I still really enjoyed it, and I really recommend the audiobooks if you're interested in it, because the narrator is excellent, and the book includes a lot of traditional language practices that are traditional to the Anishinaabe culture, and so you get to actually hear the correct pronunciation for some of the words. And I think sharing some of those cultural practices and stuff with people is also a really big part of the purpose of this duology within the larger context of the story. Really enjoyed it. Definitely recommend Moon of the Turning Leaves. Oh my god, okay, I loved this next book. That is Wild Dark Shore by Catherine McConney. Wild Dark Shore is following a family, a father and his children, who live on this island that has a seed bank in the very far South Pacific, kind of like under Tasmania, close to Antarctica. So it's quite cold, it's super remote, and the reason that they're there, they're kind of like the groundskeepers of this island where researchers come and they have a seed bank there that is kind of like Svalbard. And they are the last ones that are left on the island because of climate change. The seed bank and the island are starting to flood, and the tides are coming in, and it's really eerie and misty and moody and chilly and cold. And we are following the woman who washes up on their shore. She is still alive, and they nurse her back to health, even though she's serrated and totally beat up from washing up on these rocky things. And she has a secret, and they have a secret, and their secrets are connected, and we slowly learn what is actually truly going on. Because when she gets there, she discovers that all communications have been shut off from this island, and so they basically have to wait there for 6 weeks, I think it is, until the final ship comes to pick them up, and they will leave forever. Oh, it's so good. There's one of the daughters is this sea creature practically. She loves to spend time in the water and swims with the animals, and then one of the sons is a little bit of a Meerkat type of character where he's a little odd, and loved the seed bank and all of the things in it, and just has all of these fun facts. And then we're following this older son who has experienced something that is traumatic and doesn't know how to communicate about it, and doesn't really know how to go forward from there. It was one of the best books. I didn't include it on my best books of the year, but I mentioned her as a potential new favorite author. I haven't read anything else from her. And as I'm sitting here describing it to you, I'm thinking maybe this was one of my favorite books so far of the year. It might be. I'm really excited to check out more of her work. I thought the writing was just stunning. If you liked Our Wives Under the Sea or anything by Julia Armenfield, you might really like this book too, because she has a very lyrical, beautiful way of writing, but there's also a lot of character work and eeriness and almost magical realism, but not quite. There's just a little bit of blurring between that line of what is real and what is not at certain points, and the way it is done gives so much suspense to the novel. I really was not sure for a good chunk of it if someone was gonna die, or if someone already died, or maybe there's a huge murder conspiracy. I really wasn't sure where we were going with it, and I was on the edge of my seat. I think I read it in one sitting, basically. It just had everything: the character-driven plot, the murder, the suspense, the atmosphere. It was gorgeous, and this kind of undercurrent, no pun intended, of commentary on climate change that was not at all ham-fisted. So, Wild Dark Shore, Beautiful. Okay, then I read another banger, The Night and the Moth. This is Rachel Gillig's new duology, or the beginning of her new duology. We are following Sybil, who is a diviner. She wears a shroud over her eyes, she lives in a covenant with her sisters in divining, and one day a ragtag sort of company of people, including a king who has just recently inherited the throne, he's super young and naive, comes along with his hot eyeliner wearing knight named Rory. I hate that name. No offense to people named Rory. Shortly after their appearance, her sisters begin to go missing, and she ends up joining this company and going on this kind of adventure to try and save them, discover what happened, and track down magical objects, which I'm going to give no details to because I think it is way more fun when you discover it. But the magic system is so interesting. Like I really enjoy her magic systems. They are the perfect kind of line between hard and soft, where you have sort of the basic rules, but then these sort of whimsical things kind of happen and come up along. They're so creative. The best part of this book was the gargoyle. He is her almost like her animal companion, almost like her like comedic relief child. He kind of stole the show. So he was part of the cathedral, like almost like bodyguards, clerics, people that would hang out and like make sure things run smoothly. But he's a little weird and like offbeat compared to the others, and he comes along with her. He calls everybody Bartholomew, and he doesn't really have a name except Gargoyle. It just felt like something that like maybe Gail Carson Levine would write if she wrote adult stuff. I don't know how to like even frame that, but I loved it. It was very romance forward, but there was still a very solid fantasy plot. And yeah, honestly, just 5 stars. 5 stars. It kind of has revived my desire to read and engage with fantasy, which I haven't had honestly for quite a while, outside of probably the Bone season. So yeah, that is The Night and the Moth. Thank you, Rachel Gillig. You do not disappoint. After that, I got on the Legendborn train. It's a YA fantasy, and I have said before, whenever I read YA fantasy, I can still really enjoy it, but I definitely feel, not for me anymore. I'm not a young adult. But I think because this has a college setting, it has a lot of like crossover appeal, and I think I would just basically pitch this as like Arthurian Shadowhunters. This is about Brie Matthews. She's 16 and going to uni early. Her mother has recently died. She's having a really bad time with it, is kind of trying not to implode. She gets pulled into this kind of secret society a la Ninth House, and discovers that they are in fact all demon slaying, magic wielding people who may or may not have ties to her mother's death, where she kind of becomes an acolyte of the Legendborn, and is sort of competing in these different trials to finally become, well, one of the Legendborn, like one of the upper crust people that are involved in the society. But she's kind of undercover, and she's doing this with the somewhat coerced assistance of the prodigal son heir of this organization. And of course he's really hot, so bonus points. Imperfect, but very fun. And I can totally see why everybody seems to love it on book 2. I will say that I tried to read book 2, and I am still reading it. I haven't DNF'd it. I've just kind of put it down for now. There's been like a 1-week jump basically between the end of Legendborn and the beginning of the Oathbound Bloodborn, where I feel like our character had this massive knowledge jump, and it kind of annoys me. But I'm only like 10% in maybe. So we'll just see if I'm able to make peace with that and move on and like get engaged into the plot again. Okay, and finally I read Possession by A.S. Byatt. This took me probably a good 3 weeks to get through because it is very slow. Not entirely a bad thing, but I'll get to that in a minute. This is going to be the perfect book for somebody who would personally, in their own life, enjoy spending enormous amounts of time dissecting and tracking down and digging through a pair of Victorian poets' personal lives and their entanglement with one another. Because that is pretty much exactly what this book is. It's full of poetry by these 2 fictional poets who are, I believe, based on Christina Rossetti and somebody else whose name is escaping me right now. And our main characters are Maud and Roland. Roland is a scholar of a poet named Ash, and Maud is a distant relation / scholar of Christabel Lamotte. And they discover that these 2 may have had like a secret illicit relationship. or affair. And yeah, we just follow them as they slowly dig through what the nature of that relationship was, what the implications are, what that means for scholarship and for poetry and the work of these two characters. I thought this had a very satisfying end. It explored a lot of really interesting themes, especially related to like women in scholarship and women as artists and challenges that they face. And I really liked Maud. She was not what I totally expected. She's a bit eccentric, and like I think he describes her when he first sees her as like hostile, and she is quite hostile and a little prickly when he first meets her, but then kind of continues to be somewhat throughout the book. As these two researchers or scholars, and this is set in the 80s, I think it was written in 94 or 92, as they also begin to like develop a certain type of relationship. I got that tip off that I should probably, expect to go at a bit of a crawl for most of the book until like probably the last like maybe 100 pages. Because in the introduction she mentioned that one of her greatest inspirations was The Name of the Rose. And that is the book that is a literary mystery also, like this one, where we had like a lot of side quests involving medieval Christian theology, which was more than I wanted or needed in my life. And I felt like there was a little bit more, like I would have been okay with a more abbreviated version of this book. Particularly in regard to like certain character POVs, I just felt like, what is the point of this? Like, I don't care about these people. I want to get back to the core issues and the core characters, because I really love our four main characters, but particularly the two that are in the present day. And I was really curious to see where that was going, because as they're following this trail of primarily letters between the two Victorian poets, they become aware that there are some Americans asking around about this too. And it becomes a little bit of a race, but it doesn't feel like a race. It feels like we are leisurely digging through old musty papers with these lovely musty scents. I have to say that actually one of the best things about this for me was some of her prose. Like there were moments where it felt a little slower or more bogged down than it needed to, but when it hit, it hit. For instance, in the very beginning, he finds this one, I think it's a book, that is coated with Victorian dust. What Victorian dust feels like and smells like, and why it's that way, because of the smog and the air, and that part lends such a great atmosphere. I actually feel like people who are looking for a great dark academia book that is like deeply literary and like atmospheric, I guess, should be checking this one out. And I really enjoyed the poetry. Poetry was beautiful. It was really actually one of my favorite parts of this book. Yeah, I don't know. It was okay. I think that's how I felt about it ultimately. But for some people, it is gonna be their favorite book ever, I betcha. That is Possession. I originally picked this up because I read that Ava Reid was inspired in part to write A Study in Drowning because of this book. And I can see the similarities. But if you want something that's like really fast paced and like just like a shot of kind of academic, kind of romantic, go for Ava Reid's. If you want to like linger in it and read about Victorian dust and poetry about fairies, A.S. by it is where you should be. After that, I will just really briefly mention Growing Things by Paul Tremblay. This is a very short story in the collection of short stories called Growing Things. And I'm just mentioning it because I had kind of a fun time with it, and I'm kind of slowly working my way through the ebook, as long as I have it on my phone, from the library, because I've never read this author before, but I know he's big in horror, and I've been kind of looking for some more horror. I really want eco-horror, botanical horror, something that feels earthy and scary at the same time, in a similar but different way that Wild Orc Shore did for me, because that one's more of like a thriller, not really horror. But anyway, Growing Things is following these two sisters. They are in their house. They don't go outside because there is this like plant that is essentially taken over, and it's kind of driven their father to madness to an extent. And that takes place over like 10 pages, and it was sad and eerie and creepy and kind of existential, and I liked it. So that is Growing Things by Paul Tremblay. Hopefully I will read more of his books. If you've read any of his books, actually, I would like to hear about what or which ones, and if you have recommendations in that ballpark for me, even if it's not Paul Tremblay and it's like just botanical horror. Which brings me to the end of this video. Now I can finally finish reading These Summer Storms by Sarah MacLean. I'm reading it right now. Very, very fun. So I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching. If you made it to this point in the video, leave me a little comment about what your favorite book was this month, or if you have a botanical horror or Paul Tremblay recommendation for me, drop it down there. And yeah, I'll see you again very soon in another video. Bye!